Hello and welcome to the 5th edition of our Investment Insight series, Magellan Minutes. My name's Jennifer Herbert, Head of Listed Funds at Magellan, and today I'm joined by David Costello, Infrastructure Portfolio Manager. Today we'll be discussing decarbonisation and the opportunities ahead, the impact utilities have on carbon emissions, and how the infrastructure team manage risk within the portfolio. Thanks for joining us today, David.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here.
Decarbonisation is a huge thematic in the markets at the moment, and there's much excitement about the scope of the opportunity. Realistically, how big is that opportunity?
The International Renewable Energy Agency estimates that to achieve net zero emissions globally by 2050 will require cumulative investments of $115 trillion over the period to 2050. Now, that's an extraordinary number, but to put it in context, that's an amount just a little bit above global GDP last year. Now, last year, according to the IEA's World Investment Outlook, the world spent about $1.2 trillion on energy transition-related investments. To get to net zero by 2050, the world will need to increase that run rate to around $3 trillion per year by 2030, so approximately 2.5 times current levels of investment, and to $4 trillion per year by 2050, more than 3 times current levels of investment.
And utilities are huge carbon emitters. Surely they're part of the problem. Like, how do we justify our holdings in utilities?
Certainly some of our vertically integrated regulated utilities own coal or gas-fired generating facilities, and so they do today generate meaningful emissions. But rather than being part of the problem or an issue that's hard to justify, we regard these assets as being central to the solution. Indeed, we'd go so far as to suggest they unlock the path to a net zero economy. When you think about the world's plans to get to net zero, inevitably 2 policies assume central importance. Firstly, policymakers recognise the imperative of replacing legacy thermal generation, coal and gas, with sustainable sources of generation, principally wind and solar, perhaps supplemented by nuclear, by hydropower, or perhaps in the future green hydrogen. And secondly, and this is crucial, they seek to take that clean energy and electrify as much of the economy as possible, driving emissions out of the broader ecosystem. So in that context, our electric utilities are the cornerstone on which the energy transition will be built. These businesses have been investing billions of dollars, accelerating the retirement of their legacy thermal generating assets and investing to build new renewable generating capacity, to connect renewables to the network and to augment their distribution networks to support things like electric vehicles and electric heat pumps. Now, that investment is already supporting highly attractive rates of growth for our utilities. These businesses are almost invariably growing at 5 to 7 or 6 to 8% per annum. Now, they typically offer a dividend yield somewhere in the region of 2 to 3% per annum, so you're looking at a total prospective shareholder return somewhere in the region of 7 to 10% per annum for businesses that have a fairly benign risk profile and highly predictable and visible growth. Now, those investments have already supported meaningful emissions reductions. Across our universe, many of these businesses have already reduced their emissions by 40 or perhaps even 50%. And almost invariably, these businesses have ambitious targets to get to net zero by 2050 or perhaps even earlier. Now, we have high visibility that this growth will continue for the next 30 years. A study by Princeton in 2020 showed that the US will need to spend $6 to $10 trillion over the next 30 years on new generating capacity and new transmission capacity. Now, to put that number in context, that would require utilities to increase their current run rate of investment by approximately 50% and maintain that level of investment each year for the next 30 years.
That all makes sense, and it certainly does sound like a very exciting opportunity. But there must also be some associated risk with the transition, and what comes to mind for me is stranded asset risks. So how do you manage that and other associated risks with regards to the portfolio?
Certainly. So our strict definition of infrastructure protects us from some of these risks, Jen. So we don't invest in competitive merchant generation, so we don't have exposure to legacy coal-fired generating assets that might face stronger competition from renewables. Similarly, we don't invest in commodity price sensitive oil and gas pipelines. our exposure to energy infrastructure is very selective. We'll only invest in assets that have predictable cash flows underpinned by long-term take-or-pay contracts or cost of service regulation. There's only 4 companies that meet that strict definition that we invest in the energy infrastructure space. Now, within that framework, we do see some longer-term risks to these businesses. These assets transport oil and gas, principally in North America. Now, in North America, approximately 50% of every barrel of oil produced goes towards gasoline production. And with auto OEMs signalling that they'll shift to the exclusive production of electric vehicles from around 2030 to 2035, these businesses do face longer-term existential risks. We're comfortable, though, that with this cost of service regulation and with long-term take-or-pay contracts, that these businesses' cash flows will be secure for some time. You've got at least 10 to 13 years where the vehicle fleet will continue to be dominated by internal combustion engines. And even beyond that, the vehicle fleet tends to turn over at approximately 5% per annum. So there'll be some period beyond which only electric vehicles are sold, where there's significant demand for the products that are shipped on these pipelines.
David, thank you for your insights today. And thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Magellan distribution team and feel free to share this update with clients and colleagues as you see fit. Take care and see you soon.